So we just covered Latin America and revolutions of independence versus Spain and Portugal. That's going to also happen in Brazil, although we didn't cover it, against the French in Haiti. And we are transitioning from Latin American revolutions and new movements in art and technology and science. And we are going to look more specifically at imperialism in chapter 20. And we're really going to look at the second half of the 19th century when we look at imperialism. And we have to look at the context of this imperialism too. So we want to know that a lot of this imperialism is going to be a consequence of the Industrial Revolution. So the Industrial Revolution is going to be very important in terms of, and we look at this map, European countries, here's Europe, and the United States as well, are going to be looking at ways to gain access to raw materials. And so Europe is going to focus on imperialism in Africa and Asia, and the United States is going to, remember that term, Monroe Doctrine? They're really going to focus on Latin America, but going to fight a war, the Spanish-American War, at the end of the 19th century that will gain them even more territory in the Caribbean and in the Pacific as well. And the U.S. will take over the Philippines, but that's something we'll talk about at a later date. But look at this map. Europe is basically going to take over Africa, and I want you to realize that this is late. This is not 1600s, 1700s. This is late 1800s when Europe is basically colonizing Africa, and lots of Southeast Asia. You can see the Dutch here. Remember, the United Kingdom controlled by the British. So you can see India is going to be taken over by the British, Australia, New Zealand already. So there's lots of territory that is taken over by Europe and eventually the United States. And the question is why? Why does imperialism take place in the latter half of the 19th century? So think spice groups. So socially, politically, environmentally, culturally, economically, what do you think is the driving force for imperialism? A lot of history is a battle for resources, wealth, capital. So that's going to be important, and that connects to the Industrial Revolution. Remember, these factories need raw materials. So this could be economic, it could be environmental, because they're resources, raw materials like rubber and tin. This is going to be a different kind of colonization or imperialism, and it's going to be termed New Imperialism. So write that down, please. New Imperialism, because it's more connected to the accumulation of raw materials for factories. Whereas like Spanish colonization was trying to gain gold and silver. These are raw materials that can be produced, turned into finished goods via the factory system. And new imperialism also has technological advantages. Guns, steamships can get places quicker. We're going to have the Suez Canal. We're going to talk about the British taking over India. The British with steamships and the Suez Canal can get to India in half the time and not sail around Africa. So engineering, Suez Canal, again, in the latter half of the 19th century. All of these factors, again, guns as well, even chemicals like pharmaceuticals like quinine, are going to make Europeans less susceptible to diseases like malaria in Africa and Latin America. So all of these reasons help contribute to Europe taking over a lot of Africa, Southeast Asia again, and Asia. What about Latin America, though? Again, Latin America, you can see independent states. Remember, they just had their revolutions, and they aren't colonized. However, Monroe Doctrine, the U.S., this is basically a U.S. sphere of influence. So these governments in Latin America are connected to U.S. business, and the U.S. does not want Europe to intervene in this sphere of influence. Okay, so realize that Latin America is independent during this new imperialism, but also connected to the United States and under the influence, economic, political influence of the United States. Okay, so what are some other reasons? So we said economic new imperialism. So number 2, social Darwinism. And one of our groups covered social Darwinism. And remember, Darwin in The Origin of Species in 1859 said, there are phenotypes, physical characteristics that are more advantageous to environments, and those organisms that possess them will pass on their DNA and reproduce and continue their existence. So some Europeans take that idea and apply it to groups of people and say there are people that are more superior culturally in terms of intelligence, and those people they believe are the Europeans. And even within Europe, they categorize. Like Northern Europeans are superior to Southern Europeans, and there were hierarchies even in Europe. So there are these hierarchies of races that are superior to others. Europe, thinking of themselves being the top group of this hierarchy. But even within Europe, there are subsets of hierarchies. So also, and culturally, Christianity. There is a move to Christianize people throughout the world as well. But economically, again, so much of world history, in my humble opinion, is driven by the battle for resources. We've got some political cartoons, I think, that are really interesting that have to do with imperialism. We're not going to specific new imperialism. We're not specifically going to look at Africa today. We're going to look more specifically at India. But I do want you to know where this is happening at, because we will deal more specifically with Africa, which is this continent in this political cartoon. This is Cecil Rhodes. And he is British, and you can see he's got one of his feet on Cairo and Johannesburg. So this idea, and he's got this rope or chain, this idea of the British having an uninterrupted possession of territory from North Africa to South Africa and Cecil Rhodes. This political cartoon is what dynasty in China? The last dynasty, the Qing dynasty. And you can see Japan and England and Germany and Russia all carving up China. China's not going to be taken over like India so directly, but it will definitely lose power, and a lot of foreign influence will come in. This is famous. Theodore Roosevelt. The big stick, speak softly and carry a big stick. And basically U.S. naval ships protecting the Caribbean, reference to the Spanish-American War. So U.S. sphere of influence here, stay out Europe. Africa, this is the scramble for Africa. Again, this idea of cutting up and splitting up, just like China. Another reference to Roosevelt and the United States with the Spanish-American War and this big gun pointed at the King of Spain, okay, over the Dominican Republic. So you can see that there are lots of political cartoons representing a lot of this imperialism, and Europe and the United States taking over territory or establishing much influence over territories. The Qing is one empire, land empire, that is really declining and collapsing, and it will in 1911 officially collapse. What's another large land empire in the Middle East? The Ottomans. And the Ottoman Empire, too, will be on the verge of collapse. Let's look at India. The Mughal Empire, it has been established, right? We've talked about the Taj Mahal and whatnot, and the British are very interested in India for what resource? Cotton and factories. Remember, taking raw materials, cotton, and making them into finished products, finished goods, textiles, and then forcing India to buy those textiles. Okay, so slowly, gradually, India starts to take over. You can see some of the dates and the territories that Britain is taking over territory in India. It's really in 1857 and 58, the Sepoy Rebellion, that really establishes, you should put an arrow here, a political Sepoy Rebellion, the British Raj, or British rule, Raj, rule over India. Sepoys were guards. They had guns. They guarded warehouses for the British East India Company, British East India Company. And some of them were Muslim, some of them were Hindu, and they had packages of ammunition that they had to open with their mouth, their teeth, to rip them open. Some of these packages were sealed with cow fat. Some of them were sealed with pig fat. This is problematic for religion if you're Hindu or Muslim, not coming into contact with those animals. So they rebel, and to rebel against just overall British occupation in India. They are unsuccessful in this rebellion, and it's going to lead to basically Britain taking over most of India. And how does Britain rule over India? The Indian Civil Service. So the Indian Civil Service, British officials will rule over much of India. And what is the historical legacy of this rule? What are the advantages to the British ruling over India? Well, sati is prohibited, made illegal. Remember, widow burning on funeral pyres when the husband died. So that is gotten rid of. There is technology that is brought into India, like railroads. Sewage helps lower incidence of disease like cholera. But you also have to look at the negative legacy with the culture of English. You're going to read this article, this Google Doc, in a second, but I'll get there. Women who made beautiful hand-woven textiles, especially in the western part of India, are going to be put out of business because of the factory. So you have a lot of women losing their livelihood because of industrialization. You're going to have a reaction called the Indian National Congress. Middle-class Indians are going to protest British control of India, led by Rammohun Roy. But I really want to look at the culture and Lord Macaulay. So read this Google Doc right now, and in your notes, write what you think is most offensive